Okay. There's about a 10-second lag. So. And here we go. There's about a 10-second lag. Okay, so welcome to. Are you going to take over, Ammon, or?
I'm easy. Obviously, the big man himself isn't here, so I may as well. Welcome to the Bogus Hangouts, which we believe is a part of a certain person's legacy that needs to live on. He always loved these shows, and we loved spending time with him and with each other, and we want that to carry on. I think we all knew that. So you'll recognise a lot of the reprobates here, but we have added to our roster Jeff Ferguson. Really nice to have you here, sir.
Hello.
But let me go around in order. Terry, introduce yourself.
Terry Van Horn, Webmaster T. I live in Toronto. Don't take clients for SEO anymore. I'm pretty well retired. Do what I want when I want. It's nice.
You did what you want when you wanted when you were an SEO.
Bingo.
Now I'm getting paid for it, though. See,
Nice.
The difference. I got the pension, so I'm getting paid now. So
The government is paying you not to work.
yes.
They've heard about the trouble you cause. They've gone, right, it's cheaper to just pay him not to do anything.
My reputation precedes me.
Doc, say hello. Introduce yourself.
I'm Doc Sheldon of Web Narwhal, and I guess I've been jumping in on these for about the last 2.5 years now. I just like to stop by and rattle Terry's cage.
He does make that a joy, doesn't he?
He does. It's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. Jeff, you're next on my screen.
All right. I'm Jeff Ferguson of Amplitude Digital and UCLA. Been since I'm like new. Like I said, I've been in the business for over 25 years at this point, and I'm really excited to be here. It's one thing. It's nice to be recognized by this crew, obviously, and as somebody that's been doing SEO this long, it's good to be seen. So.
Excellent. Zara.
I'm Zara Altair, and I am completely bogus. I write, but I feel it's important for people who write for the web to understand what's going on. And I have learned so much, and it's because of all the people here. It's a gift. It's a gift.
It's a genuine pleasure. I like the fact that you've written in pretty much every format there is, including your own novels, of course. Do you find that there's a huge amount of mindset involved in the web as opposed to other media?
A huge amount of, I'm sorry, what?
Do you find there's a huge amount of mindset shift in writing for the web over writing that you'd done before the web?
Well, certainly a lot of mind shifts since I started writing for the web. One of the things that got me interested in SEO was back in 2013, 2012, 2013, somewhere around in there. I was taking a leadership program. It was a 6-month program. It was very cool. But they had one of the units in this program was about SEO, and it was old SEO. And I was like, wait, I don't think like that. Nobody thinks like that. Who is going to read this garbage, with the multiple keyword stuff? And so I went, all right, this has to be wrong. I'm going to find out what this SEO stuff is. And immediately found Lee Smallwood and Noda and David Amerland, and soon thereafter you, Ammon, and that was sort of the start of my journey. And there are still people who are doing it the old way, and I find it concerning, and I think that it's really hard for someone who's writing. Gosh, I wish Gina was here right now. It's really hard for someone who's writing for the web to talk to whoever it is that's involved in the business and say, strategically and genteelly, that your SEO is all wrong. And it's like, who are you? You're not an SEO. And it's true. I am not a technical person. I don't go in and tweak all that stuff, but when you're giving me 6 keywords and that's all you're measuring, that's not the way to do it. So I think one of the real challenges, Ammon, is how do we who write, instill new values and new thinking about how you're reaching your organic traffic and what it takes to do that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And honestly, that's a question that all good old school SEOs are still asking themselves every single day, even after 25 years in the business. We're always trying to better understand our users, better understand intent. Google's still struggling with it themselves. So that's always a fascinating side of it. I mean, Jeff, you've obviously got the different sides of writing as well, because as well as doing client side SEO, you're doing quite a bit of article writing, and of course I am absolutely confident that you have to produce a rather different kind of report sometimes for your university and academic work than we're used to in SEO.
Yeah, absolutely. The academic side has been like really interesting. You just approach it from the standpoint of I guess trying not to sound like a lot of the the web course SEOs that are out there. They take my course, subscribe to my limited run or whatever this kind of thing that are out there that add in a lot of hooey, I guess is the best way to put it. But like it's that still are kind of trotting out a lot of things that have been debunked and things like that. So you were, I know in the classroom setting, we really boiled this down to the idea of like, this is real. This is true. This is stuff that's verified. This is stuff to do it. And I had been working on it for some time because I've been writing a book for what feels like the last 5 years and haven't finished it yet. But but when I started teaching, I ended up taking a lot of the core material for that book and kind of repurposing it and kind of use it as an opportunity to go through and say, all right, let's get this in front of some people and see how they react and how they push back and how they interact with it. Are they really learning? Are they understanding all these concepts to it? What are they missing? Kind of stuff. And so it's been very good for that kind of thing. And I think it's given me another reason to delay the book a little bit more, but under the idea that I'm actually still learning this stuff. I'm still learning how to communicate it, I guess is the best way to do it. And as it is, the book was from a different standpoint anyway, because I've always kind of come from this idea of kind of SEO as a form of digital transformation for companies, especially enterprise companies and things like that. And not trying to do it from this kind of classic tips and tricks way that a lot of writers do with the web kind of thing, where it's these very limited studies, if you call them. They're not really studies, and they're truly not anything remotely close to a scientific test, but they still love to publish them and say, hey, look, I did this twice and look, it kind of worked a little bit, so I must have
sometimes not even twice.
Every twice, right? So it must be a trend. This must be the way that kind of stuff works. And so to kind of throw that a lot out and that influence is obviously, you've probably seen in some of my other writing for the Search Engine Journal, where I go through and just try and take apart a lot of those things, because I just have zero patience for things like that. The article I wrote a few years ago about the really sad state of all these SEO studies that have been done over the years, where they just have no way of looking at as to statistics properly, and everything they kind of throw out is really just a whole pseudoscience, and any other industry that get laughed out of the room for trying to present this as like a real finding or anything along like that. But meanwhile, people just kind of seem to line up and say, yeah, this is the way it works, whatever it is, and
you say that, and I can only imagine that you completely missed the pandemic and how people presented science.
yeah, it's funny. That was a lot of it. It was a fantastic example of just how bad it is, but it's also how susceptible people are to just about anything, especially when you've got when you actually have real experts that are out and putting things in front of you and saying, hey, look, we've done this, we've studied this, or at very least admitting we're still working on it. This is still something we're learning where it is, and so give us a minute. This is like a brand new thing. We have to figure this out, and then immediately kind of people throwing it out and listening to Joe Rogan instead or whatever it is, like that. It's like a perfect example of the SEO industry, as well as we've got our own Joe Rogans that are popping around in this industry that do a fantastic job of being showmen and trying to get their things out, whatever it is. And then meanwhile, you've got all the rest of us that are kind of work for a living in this business, whatever it is, that have to kind of clean up their messes as a lot. And I know Christine and I, another friend of ours that I'm sure many of you know, whatever it is, that's our eye roll of of every couple of weeks when a new client comes in. You can just tell it's like, well, clearly they were listening to this person, or that clearly they had this one beforehand, and we know exactly where this came from. And a lot of it lately is kind of unscrewing everything that a lot of people are doing in the name of EAT. That seems to be the new fix that we've been working on a lot lately, and so yeah, it's interesting, but and that it's funny that statistics comes around. As we've had actually a great example this week, and I think you shared it too. But it was over this past weekend, John Oliver did a whole bit on some of the tech monopolies, and he did it on Facebook and on Amazon and on Google, whatever it is, and kind of speak about it. But in the middle of his broadcast, he shared a statistic, a metric, whatever it is, that came from a really bad study that was done at SparkDoro about zero clicks. And as soon as I saw it came up the screen, because I usually watch that just as it comes out on Sunday nights, and I said that, I'm going like, oh God, here we go again. It's like it's this has been seen, and and it's not that I expect John Oliver to find, and his team to find my writings against it, where I've kind of like shot that down and tore it apart. But there's been multiple people that have kind of said this is just bad science, and it really wasn't done properly, what it is. And I was kind of happy to see that numerous people actually responded to John Oliver or last week tonight's like Twitter feeds and things like that with my article. So that was kind of very nice. That might not just from a viewership standpoint, but just to know, like, there are people that knew about it, that kind of stuff. But I don't at this point, he doesn't do corrections.
It's the second time in a month actually that kind of Google misinformation or poor perception has come up in the media. Stock, who I'll tell it to introduce himself just as he replies to this, but I know you shared Adam Savage's piece where he talked about his process of trying to buy a printer. Now, admittedly, there were problems in how he phrased his search, but that's the bit Google is supposed to work out, not the bit that we're supposed to worry about. And regardless, the results were garbage, and it meant that a lot of SEOs were targeting the wrong terms. Stock, introduce yourself, and if you've got anything on that, say it.
I'm Stock Trustwell. I do SEO consulting and all the stuff nobody else wants to do. But yeah, I mean, misinformation in SEO is not new. I don't even know what to say about it. I mean, we've been talking about misinformation since 2000 and whatever,
Yeah, it's something back in our days at Creator Site, talking about, we didn't call it intent back then, but we did talk about understanding the searcher, understanding the user. I mean, Creator Site was a much more usability focused forum despite also covering SEO, than the majority out there. And the user experience was something, you know, we were talking about in the noughties rather than waiting about 8 years like most SEOs seem to.
Well, I think part of it is with SEO too is it's kind of become this thing where it thinks it's the most important thing for the website, and you know, SEO trumps everything else. It trumps content. It trumps actually selling stuff to people. It trumps actually being useful. It trumps everything. As long as you're getting the people there, that's all that matters. And I guess on a news site or an ad site or something like that, that may be true to some extent, but I don't know. It's just, it's all got to be part of the big picture, or it's all useless.
It's funny, Stock, you mentioned that that's something I tend to get into it with on certain chats, and I think Ammons probably seen me do this before too, where you'll see people talk about it from this very myopic vision of like, you know, this is, as an SEO, all you think about is SEO kind of stuff, and usually it kind of, I know recently it's come up from the form of somebody's going, oh yeah, we're going to delete all this content off the site because it's one of the things where they go, well, it's no longer useful, and it's not, you know, it doesn't get any organic traffic or whatever it is, and you go, I'm like, hold on, I'm like, is anything else using it? Does it get its own traffic? Is it popular on social? You know, like, does it get direct traffic or whatever it is? And the fact that doesn't come up in conversation enough is staggering, you know, like where they just kind of like, oh, we'll just get rid of it because of somebody gave us some bad advice on you know, crawl budget or something like that. And you kind of go, yeah, I don't think you really got to worry about that. It's not something that, but it's they completely burn through it. And yeah, I know when one of the other forums, and I think a couple of you saw it too, because I remember replies on it where somebody did a whole thing about like, you know, this is my eat checklist. This is all the stuff I'm doing for this stuff, and you know, I just had to remind them, because, hey, look, that's good. It's good that you do this kind of things. Just remember that, like, you know, there's no score there. There's no other, you know, it's like you're going to do it. A lot of these things you should be doing anyway, so feel good about that. But also be careful of this one and this one, because you could just, you know, basically cut off your nose to spite your face, kind of thing. And it's really, yeah, it's a really interesting way to do this thing, where they forget they're part of like a you know, a marketing team, part of a marketing universe, and I don't know.
Well, I think that's key, Jeff, because, you know, over the years, SEO has stopped being just embed keywords and do your meta keywords and put it in the first sentence and the last sentence and 3 times through the article. And now it's come to encompass so much more, particularly as the AI efforts begin to actually make some sense out of the context of a page.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've got things like schema and you know, all these different technical considerations as well. It's almost impossible for any one individual to be, let's say, very proficient at all of those. So I think a lot of people have a tendency to pick the things that are easy, comfortable, that they're most familiar with, and focus most on those. And an awful lot of people then tend to poo-poo the value of the other things. Okay,
Yeah.
so, you know, if I'm content focused, then schema doesn't mean squat. You know, that's just a waste of your time. And vice versa. If I'm technical focused, then, you know, as long as your content is intelligible and gets the user to do what you want, you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of pieces in the puzzle, and they're all valuable.
And it's not just that there are a lot of pieces, Doc, it's that they're interconnected too.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's, you know, if you're focusing on the things you do well, you know, and ignoring the things that you don't do well, then it's like shooting yourself in the foot, because
Well, it's not even just ignoring it, Sarah. A lot of times they're actually telling everybody that it's a myth.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Which is even
you know,
worse.
what I was going to say when Jeff was speaking earlier is that they're like, it's like creating your own myth about stuff so it sounds intelligent,
Yeah.
but it's mythological. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you get to do the same thing, and then what happens is when a business takes on someone who's, you know, their SEO person, right? Whatever it is, then the SEO person is feeding these mythologies to the business, and it gets strange. And
It's strange. That's a nice
Well,
way to put it.
Yeah, it's funny to kind of to that point. So the way the book was originally designed, and I still write this in other ways, and it shows up in not only in my class but on other things. Was this? I think the big vision for it and the way I was writing this thing was this idea. Because the book was going to be called Killing SEO, and it was from this idea of like the kind of a futuristic view of it in the sense that SEO itself wouldn't die. Because as long as there's search engines, there will always be some form of SEO needed to kind of make this kind of work properly and optimize for it and things like that. But the idea is that like who's doing it would evolve over time, and especially at the enterprise level where I think it's going to start first. But it will be this idea that I think at some point enterprise companies will kind of figure out this idea that, hey, look, we've actually got all the people we need to do these SEO kind of related tasks. We've got content writers, we've got technical people, we've got public relations people that can build links and things like that. We've got all these people that actually do it, and it's the same people that the so-called SEO person that's in house goes around and begs them to do their job kind of stuff or whatever it is. But it's one of the things where eventually they'll kind of figure out and say, like, why don't we actually just make sure that those people are trained to know that piece of their job, because it's this is the way this kind of stuff works, and it'll evolve into it, and eventually the kind of the idea of having one person that is like, I'm the SEO person in an organization will go away, right? It just won't be stuff, and it's not that there won't be like any focus on SEO anymore, and there won't be it's like there won't be somebody that's kind of responsible for looking at it as far as like a source of traffic or things like that. It's just one of the things where it's just that all these other people will just go about their day job because it's just part of their job, right? They'll just know this is the upgrade of my current thing. My skill set is evolved up to include it. And I usually get a lot of pushback on that one because they say, like, they're thinking at it very much from like this time, like this is the time that we live in, and this is what we're used to, and this is the way we have to work on it because we have to be the ones that chase this stuff down and things like that. But like it's one of the things where I am talking about the future here, and this is something where it evolves out and it kind of completely transforms, and you've just got content writers that know that they need to do a certain amount of research, because like content writers are always a good example in the story, because
Jeff?
they go,
Jeff, lovely to have you here. You're about to get your proper initiation because I saw that you rattled Terry's cage there. I'm going to let Terry come in and say what he had on his mind.
Yeah,
and then I'm going to raise my hand.
Yeah, I'd start by saying there'll always be somebody who's putting the strategy together and making sure that it's being implemented correctly.
Sure.
There's got to be someone at the head.
Don't disagree there at all. Like that's something.
So
don't disagree. I just think that person's going to evolve, right? Yeah, I just don't think they're going to be like an SEO person. I think it'll be somebody else in the organization.
But
an MD, for instance.
To an extent, that is my career. I describe myself as an SEO architect. A lot of the time I am going into a company that they've got a dev team, they've got a marketing team, they've got all these parts, and my job is to direct them into an overall SEO strategy where they can all work together in a way that's going to work for one extra person, which is the search engine. And that's it. You are a manager, a project manager, you are the architect of the overall strategy. But you've got lots of people. I always like to have, champions in each department. If you've got a web dev team, I will usually focus one person who's particularly keen on SEO, who's really fascinated by it, and they will become the go-to SEO person in there. If they can't solve it, they come to me. And the same with the writers, and the same with all the other departments. Have somebody in each department that is their go-to SEO champion, and that way the questions can be focused through them, an adjutant kind of position, which means my time goes further and costs the client less.
Totally. And I think my point is that I think those roles will elevate up. I think it'll be, I mean, in the beginning, like right now, as we try and do it, and I've done this for organizations like the Smithsonian and like Manchester United and a few other ones where they've got those people and they got what it is. And, I have to go in and do a deep dive education session, but it's one of those things where I know it's not going to stick unless I teach them about change management principles, with the idea of like, hey, look, if you want this to stick around, we actually need to change the way this organization works and how it looks and this kind of stuff, and realize that this is part of the job, and that realize that when somebody leaves, they have to be taught about this kind of stuff too. So it's definitely not one of those things where it's like you can just drop in once and say, hey, we're done, and everybody should learn how to do this kind of stuff. It really is a complete evolution of the way to do it. And the reason why I was kind of stressed that this is a future way to look at stuff is because it's going to take years, right? And it's one of it'll take years before everybody kind of picks it up. But I always kind of pointed the example of, when you're talking about like the golden age of television back, we're talking about the 40s and 50s kind of thing, when television was first getting commercials on it in one form or the other, and a lot of times they were live read style commercials, or they were kind of the soap opera, like Kellogg's Presents kind of thing, right? So it's that type of thing in the early days of it. And in advertising agencies, they used to have a specialist that worked just with television advertising because it was new and it was different and it was a pain in the neck, right? It took so much more work than everything else. It was way different than handling print or even early days of radio and stuff like that. It just was a specialist. And if you want a good example of it, if you ever watched the Mad Men series, there was one character on the show that was a recurring character who that was his job. He was the television guy in the department, and that was there. So that role kind of existed. It was something for a while, but over time, and it took decades before that wasn't rolling time, that role went away. And it just became like, as somebody that was actually trained as a media planner in school before I came into SEO, like it's one of things where now just everybody is just expected, you just know how to buy television, you know how to plan for television, you know how to whatever. So it's just evolved as part of like, this is the everyday skill set for a media planner and for a media buyer, and for anybody that's involved with it. And it's like, that's the world that I can see. And it's one of the things where obviously it's not going to happen tomorrow. It may not even happen 5 years down the road, but it's something where I think if it's going to happen anywhere, enterprise will be the first ones to pick it up because they love to save a buck, right? So they're going to go like, why do we need this other consultant? Why do we need this other person when, the head of marketing or one of his people that are working for it can be the person that devises the strategy and actually, it carries it out to everybody else. Why do we need to have like a separate copywriter just for web content when we've got a great copywriter that does this kind of things and they can upgrade themselves, right? So it's those types of things where it's got the kind of vision. Yeah, sorry, Doctor.
I think you're right that this is a natural progression that in the future is probably going to come about. I would say take whatever arbitrary number of years you think is a likelihood and at least triple it.
Yeah.
for one big reason.
Yeah.
I was in business management consulting for years before I got into SEO, and the biggest stumbling block for companies, especially the larger the company, the more so, was actually forming a team.
Sure.
Getting team members to willingly share both credit and blame when things didn't happen or did happen the way they were supposed to. And when you start taking what is currently one or two people performing this, half a dozen tasks, and spread it out across a dozen people, every single one of them is a single point of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And there is always going to be one of them step on their dick.
Yeah.
And how do you budget for that? And that's the big thing with a lot of these companies.
Exactly.
The budget is king.
Mm-hmm.
The budget is everything. And the minute different departments expect to all contribute, but they may not be getting equal shares of the credit, or they may not get the equal benefit, you're in a nightmare territory.
Well, and plus somebody at the board is going to realize that where you used to spend $20,000 a month, now you're spending $70,000 a month. But that's not the way we used to do it.
Yeah.
We always did it this way, which we've all heard how many times. So, it's an uphill battle. So I'd say, triple, quadruple, quintuple.
Oh yeah,
It's going to take us because while the industry may be evolving, we as people are devolving. I'm sorry.
Oh, totally.
We're not
Yeah.
team players anymore.
Yeah, and that's the really funny thing about it is that I think one of the biggest thing that's actually holding that concept back is the SEOs themselves, because well, they're constantly in the name of like keeping their own jobs.
They don't want to let go.
It can't
Yeah.
be done. Yeah, it can't be done. That's what it is, and that's one of the things where like I always kind of say, look, the people that are going to push back hardest on this idea are the ones that are just terrified of the concept, because they realize like, well, where does my job go if there's no SEO person anymore doing this kind of stuff? And I said, like, you'll be retired by the time this actually happens, right? Like this will take so long to get out of here. You're just not going to be a thing for you. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but like you should know it is coming. It's just one of the things where it's going to be Jim whatever it is, not Z, but whatever they call the next 2 or 3 down the road. But yeah,
The big difference, of course, is that television hasn't changed in essence.
Right.
Yeah, the screens
Yep.
have got bigger and the resolution's
Yeah.
better and there's color, and people have different expectations driven by media. But the evolution has been pretty standard and easy to predict, and there hasn't been any major change. There's nothing in TV that's the equivalent of suddenly adding semantic SEO.
Mhm.
There isn't anything like schema that comes along in TV, and that's why I think it's not going to happen, simply because I think the internet is going to evolve into the next thing before the jobs have. My big prediction is that the screen is going to go away. The screen as we know it is going to go away. The internet isn't going to be something that we log into via a device or look at a little screen for. It's going to be all around us through augmented reality, through smart glass on building fronts and bus stops and street signs, where the internet is all around us all of the time, and we're permanently in it.
Oh, totally. A very good chance that our current definition of a search engine could go away before that fully happens, right? And I think that is a very big possibility. I think everything that we're seeing right now, and usually a lot of the complaints you hear about search engines, are people like us that have to touch them every day in a different kind of way. For the most part, the consumers seem to just be blissfully okay with the way these things look and say, well, this is just the way it looks. It's fine, what it is. But you are starting to see some cracks. The John Oliver report is a good example of this stuff. But we've seen a couple of outsiders. There was a New Yorker piece where they're talking about how the results aren't as what they look at, even though it was completely flawed, as they were basing it on somebody else's flawed idea. But it's one of those where those type of things are bound to get bigger and bigger, and that means there will be a shift. There will be a hole that comes up, and it's one of the things where right now most people are kind of asking for like the next great search engine, somebody else that can dethrone Google. But I actually don't think it's going to be another search engine. I think it's going to be something else that will give us new access to the web in a different way. But it's one of the things where that'll be how that stuff finally falls apart. It won't be because the government broke them up, or because because Ahrefs came up with their own search engine or whatever it is. That's not going to do it, right? It's going to be something else that it's much larger than that it will transform the way that we get to things. But it's not going to be tomorrow, but it's going to be ugly for a little bit longer. But
honestly, I thought we'd come up with that once when Second Life first came along.
mm-hmm.
I thought that was going to have a bigger impact than it did on how people use the web, because it gave them a different experience, a different way to experience the web, where you can virtually travel. Meta is just the same thing but later. It's taken it's taken Facebook 15 years to work out what happened 15 years ago. I don't know that we're still ready for Meta yet. I think that, like I said, I think the big drive at the moment is for the device to go away, not changing how we experience the use of that device. VR goggles don't change the fact that it's a machine and it's clumsy and you can't use it out on the street. It doesn't become a part of your life. The VR goggles are bigger and more clumsy than your smartphone, which is how 80% of the world use the internet.
Oh, totally. That's how it got there. So when I was in college in the 90s, in the early 90s, I worked at Radio Shack and I sold cell phones, and the ones we sold were the big things that looked like they were, like the guys used to wear on their back in Vietnam, when their computer looked like a radio office.
The status symbols.
Yeah, the bag phones, the
Status
big stickers.
symbol,
Yeah.
and when I was in San Francisco and worked in the financial district, you'd see these guys with these things, walking down the street with these things, because it wasn't that they were communicating; it was that they had the
They
thing.
could see it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But even then, they were so limited in the way they do stuff, and they really didn't get to reach and everything that we're seeing now. And it's because they were so expensive, and that's what it is. So and I think VR is still in that kind of realm right now, where it's a big, complicated, goofy, piece of machinery that you have to buy in addition. And it's you're limited. You have to kind of stay in your living room to do it. You have stuff, and I know there've been some visions of the fact that it forces everybody to stay inside. Like, I don't necessarily know that's going to happen, because I think everybody saw, was it Ready Player One, with the idea that society had pretty much collapsed into itself and everybody just kind of stayed inside or whatever it is. But like I can't see us really getting there. I mean it's one of those things where I think we'll instead come up with something that's a lot more portable, something that is inside of it, and something a lot more William Gibson. I guess is the view. I've ever read William Gibson, but his stuff is just like through implants and through other things, to where there's other ways to kind of jack into the internet that are allow you to kind of do it everywhere or see it in different things. But it's it's down the road. But we'll have these clumsy things a while, but it'll be a limited thing until they're just much easier to do it. Just like the cell phones didn't take off to the flip phone, and something that was smaller and handheld really kind of came something you can put in your pocket. Until it gets there, people are going to push back on this kind of stuff.
I can't see people allowing electrodes put into them for a device. Can't see it.
Yeah.
There's a product currently being sold on the streets in Japan.
That doesn't mean.
Hang on. This thing is about the size of a tiny transistor radio, clips on your belt. And then they've got, it's a different frequency, but it's basically a Bluetooth earpiece with a mic built into it. And that's their phone. It's down here on their belt. They could dial it. It'll take voice, call George or dial such and such number, find me the nearest Pizza Hut, whatever. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an embedded chip. It could just be something, because people won't take a vaccine to save their kids' lives. They're not likely to embed a cell phone in the back of their ear, Yeah. But it's not necessary anymore. There are ways to do it without implantation.
Yeah, they'll get close enough as they can. Right? Yeah.
Anything that's as assistants are now being put into new homes, like part of the infrastructure of the home.
Yep.
That's when it becomes big. Just like the internet didn't really start to get real legs until cable came, and we got cable. In other words, it worked at a speed that was usable. I remember doing it on the old 12 baud and 24 baud. Yeah, not usable.
Yeah, that was still the hobbyist era like that. But once we get that faster internet around, what you could get, what you saw when you were at work, that was usually where most of us got the really fast internet, because we had there was the T1 line.
The T1 line,
that was coming into the building. That was finally where you go, oh, this is crazy. This is going to change the world. But it's kind of like having a really fast phone and realizing that most of the world's still in 3G. It's like it's going to take some time. I
remember I thought we were in Buck Rogers times when I actually saw my first 1200 baud modem. I said, whoa.
Yeah.
I remember
toaster's
how thrilling it was to go from 600 to 900 baud.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I want to go back in just a couple of minutes and think about something that Jeff mentioned about chasing, and what Ammons said about change management. So kind of here in the present moment and not the future, but that I think that we can help the people we work with by pointing them, leading them in the direction of change management and what's ahead, and how do you manage change? How do you manage change here at ABC? Rather than coming in and saying, I'm your new SEO tech expert, and we're going to chase the best whatever. So it's like a way of not only thinking about what we're doing, but a way of I don't know, educating, for lack of a better word, but a way of helping businesses think about what are they actually doing on the internet, and what is it that they do want to do in the future on the internet. Um, it's a tool, it's everywhere. Um, and if you go to a business and they're going, it's like everybody else is doing it, so they're in this chase mentality. And that I think our jobs, all of us, is to help businesses bring them from that chase mentality into the change mentality. How is it that you want to change your business? And always back to, but how is it that you want to connect with your buyers, whatever it is that they're buying? What is it that how do you want to educate them? And how do you want to connect with them emotionally? How do you get that emotional connection that helps people buy? But that all of our jobs is to help businesses manage change, because things are always changing, and
To me,
that you need to have, one of your expectations is that change is happening. It isn't how we did it 5 years ago. It's change is happening now. What is happening now? That's the question of the day. That's the question that we all ask each other all the time. So what's going on? And oh, look, you found this thing that's happening. But that, and it's one thing to talk about it among ourselves, which is really cool, how we educate each other. But then we have this next thing that we must do, which is to bring that change awareness to the businesses that we work with.
So, to an extent, I say these are my approach to this is that it's always been the same thing. What we're doing is we're talking about intent, we're talking about objectives, and we've got to get people out of the idea of following other people's steps and programs, and more into what do you want to achieve, and what is the most sensible way to achieve that. And that's what the user is doing with their intent in search. That's what your client is doing in their approach to their web strategy. And that's also how they've got to change how their structure works to get the objective done, and not to be in that position where they had a Pyrrhic victory on a battle and lost the war.
Mm-hmm.
Which
And of course,
so often happens.
And one of the big stumbling blocks to that, especially when you get into the larger organizations that tend to have more senior management people, people who've been around 60, 70 years in the business rather than being millennials, is getting them to recognize that there even is to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Because marketing, if you look at a 60-year span, marketing really hasn't changed. The tools, the channels have changed, but the concept of marketing really hasn't changed. And if they haven't changed internally to focus on those new channels, they don't see a change, and they just don't want to consider it. And I run into that all the time too.
Yeah, and again, this depends on how people embraced marketing. One of my early heroes was always Henry Ford, and particularly his thing: whoever focuses on how much you can give away for $1 instead of how little is bound to succeed. And there are a lot of companies. There's a lot of advice generally in society that it's all about squeezing the customer and getting the maximum profit you possibly can, the minimum viable product, the thing I hate beyond all reason. This idea of minimum viable, I loathe it. I think it's awful. I think it's the worst possible advice. Instead, focus on the maximum possible. It may take you a while to get there, and you may iterate on the way, but always focus on maximum viable proposition. What's the most you can do that's still going to drive profit and keep you in business, because that makes you almost untouchable until somebody can come up with something even better that you couldn't come up with, in which case you were beaten. Not unfairly, not because you underestimated how much people could be manipulated, but because somebody outperformed you. They were able to do something even better. That isn't just about business, that's about society as a whole. That's how capitalism is supposed to work, that people come up with a better product, and it means that society and products and science evolves to the strongest,
spot on.
not the weakest.
Yep. And in fact, if you don't believe that that's spot on, go to Amazon or even Yelp. God, I just threw up a little in my mouth. Read through 100 reviews, and you'll find that the vast majority of the reviews focus more on a customer service that they feel they received, rather than the quality of the product or the price of the product or the function of the product. They're more impressed, and they're more likely to take the time to go write a good review when the service that they got, even when the problem was obviously their own fault. They misordered, they ordered the wrong product. When they feel like they've been treated specially by the company, that registers more strongly than when they feel like they got a great price or an extra function or better durability. Those are all pluses, but not nearly as much as being treated like gold as a customer.
Okay. You know what? I'm going to stop rattling Terry's cage quite so much myself, because I don't know, but Terry might have grabbed some news and wanted us to cover. So I'm going to ask him before we move on any further. Terry, was there anything in the headlines this week that you wanted to bring up this week?
Not really, no.
Eggs.
Didn't want to
rattle his cage in all the other ways. That's good. I didn't want you to spend time looking up a few headlines and I've never covered it.
There were a couple in the room earlier, but I'm disappointed that IE6 is not being started anymore. That's me, and that's the guy. So
I'm shocked, Terry, that you would worry about a Microsoft product not performing anymore. Unthinkable that
we should observe a moment of silence there for IE6, no?
Yeah. Before it went out from later on.
After 12 years of silence, why not?
Yeah. I have used it for. I actually even had to go back and look it up. It goes, I thought it was dead already. It's like it's like an actor you hadn't seen in a long time. It goes, didn't he dead already? I thought he was dead. But it's just they had other versions of themselves and they changed their name and things like that. So, but I guess that was what they really killed off, was they just were going to support those last copies of IE that were still kicking around. But
you'd be surprised how many.
Oh yeah.
Very large companies are probably still using it.
Oh yeah. Yep. Imagine that. Talk about change management. Imagine that memo going out. Everybody, because guys, we're finally going to have to cut the cord on this one. You're going to have to go out to something else.
It's incredible. I worked in an environment where they wouldn't even allow me to use Perl.
Yeah.
I remember studying some time ago where quite a lot of countries basically get the products that aren't sold in our society anymore. There are parts of India where they're still buying 386 PCs because they're still on the market there, because the people who overproduced them and had warehouses full are still trying to get rid of the stock, and they'll sell them cheap somewhere, and they'll often sell them cheap somewhere where they don't want to sell them the latest goods, or maybe they can't afford the latest goods. So there are still 386 PCs out in the wild, used by companies around the world. You just won't often hear of them, and I don't think those are going to run Edge. Not that anyone should, in my opinion. Edge is awful. But
that's all I use is Edge.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
I don't like Chrome because I feel that Google sees everything I do on it, so I don't use it.
Funny. It's funny. We were talking about change management and back to my problem before about the evolution and to Ammon's point of how like it'll take forever, and Doc's point how it'll 5 times what it is. But like I worked at Kimberly Clark for a while, for a couple years, and it's one of the older companies in the United States. They've been around forever. They invented a lot of products we're used to. So like there's a reason why we call every tissue a Kleenex. It's because of Kimberly Clark, right? And the boss that hired me, he'd been there for 30 years, which was staggering. Like you just don't see that kind of stuff anymore. And I remember he was telling me that he's moments away from retiring. He was really just kind of biding his time until he could get his time out of here, what it is. And there was a computer in his office, and he told him he resisted that thing for as long as he could. Like he just whatever. And as further resistance, he really didn't still use it much. It's one of the things where And so he told you, like, if you really wanted to like get a hold of me, it was still memos. It was still making an appointment with my secretary, that kind of stuff. And then we still had secretaries at Kimberly Clark, which I thought was mind blowing. But but it was like that was the world you live with, and that's why like when Doc you say like multiplied times 5 times or that it'll take forever. Like that's why I understand it's so true, because that's the way it works. But it's the same thing, Terry, with IE and all these other ones. People hold on to stuff. They get used to it. There's no reason to change those things. I mean, if you look at every major industry you can think of that now it's done in a certain way. And somebody mentioned Henry Ford before, but it's one of the things where like even car manufacturing, like we had that tech for what we would look at as robotics for a decade before it actually went into like full use because of the resistance of it, and and it was the human resistance of like I'll lose my job, I don't want to do this, or this is this, we don't believe in it, whatever it is. And it could have completely revolutionized things. It could have lowered the price of cars. It could have made things easier. It could have whatever it is. But it's people are going to push back on this kind of stuff, and so
honestly, I think a lot of the resistance to robotics is the huge investment it takes. Mm-hmm. It's a big upfront investment. Whereas doing the same thing, you've got a set. You're already profitable with it. So whatever you spend this month, you're going to make X amount back. Whereas with robotics, you're looking at doing millions of dollars of investment, and if something happens to your 5-year plan, you may never make it back. If something happens and your company struggles in the next year or the year after that, your investment in robotics may be the thing that sent you bust.
Yeah,
that was what did it, until they saw enough companies that had made their money back many times over that, do you know what, everyone else has taken that risk, we can't be left behind. We can't compete unless we upgrade. So it's the bullet we have to bite.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. I did want to. I mean, I know I'm the new kid, and I don't know how this works on the show and everything, like whatever. But I did want to kind of go back to that John Oliver piece, just because it did made the news and what it is. But I wanted to kind of approach it from the standpoint of his whole point about the concept of is Google as a monopoly and Google the way they do it, and I think it's one of the things where I've thought about before, where the idea is like the way our laws in the U.S. are written here when it comes to monopolies, what it is, are wholly out of date. Like they haven't been touched in decades, what it is, and like a lot of things, the internet kind of changed the way you look at stuff, and I think the reason why we're not going to see any movement on the idea of Google as a monopoly, or even Facebook as a monopoly, or even Amazon as a monopoly, whatever it is, because the way those laws are written is that they don't look like a monopoly in the eyes of any law that is written at this moment, because every way they can look at it, they go like, yeah, but we're really not a monopoly this way.
And
it's
exactly that. Look,
yeah.
It's imagine you've got a political party. Mm-hmm. Right, and they've been really popular. The other party is just not really in the running. We've just had them, and they were bloody awful. We've got a political party. They get 80% of the vote, a landslide. It has happened in history. Mm-hmm. Has that party got a monopoly? I mean, they have all the advertising budget. Well, look at all the tiny little independent politicians who couldn't get in.
Yeah.
Has that party got a monopoly, or did people have a choice?
Right.
Could they have voted other ways? And this is the thing with Google. Yeah, as a search engine, they're definitely not a monopoly. Bing is almost as good, and the only reason people aren't using it is they have chosen not to.
Yeah.
For
And
whatever reason, they still had the choice.
yeah. And
Android may
Yeah.
seem like a monopoly, more so than search is. And yet the iPhone is the one that everyone talks about.
right. Totally it is.
Doc.
But, you know, one of the things that struck me about Rand's tweet on this thing that really cut me to the quick. He
I
made
didn't see
the
it. He just blocked
comment.
me years ago.
Well, yeah, he said something to the effect of, you know, with Google and Apple, and I don't know who the other one was, perhaps Microsoft, but he named three of them. Google and Apple were two of them. Always focusing on their own products. When are we going to stop that? Well, Jesus Christ! You know, how many times does Ford need to mention General Motors in their ads? Of course, they focus on their own products. You nitwit. They're a business.
Yep.
This
Yeah.
is the guy who wouldn't speak at conferences unless you bought 1,000 copies of his book. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you know, that was
You
one
wanna
of
You
the.
want to talk
Hey,
capitalism? That's capitalism, right? Yeah.
I
think
don't understand how that can possibly go over anybody's head that they're a business and they're going to focus on their product.
Oh, totally. And what's weird is that, and that's one of the things I pointed out, like in my article, I was just in there, was that if your point is that Google's a monopoly or they're dominating, they're focused on products, there have been a couple different studies. Rand even did one of them where the only thing they pulled out was the percentage of searches that sent people to an actual Google product were about 6%. Right, 6% out of all this stuff. The rest of it was in the world, and even if you look at it from a standpoint of how much of Google searches actually have ads on them, which is their bread and butter. That's how they make billions of dollars, whatever it is. We're talking anywhere between 2 to 5% of actually like searches that actually have an ad on it. So that means that the majority of their site they're just giving away for free on this one. And even if you look at it from like, well, what are they actually dominating? Are they dominating the search market? Yeah, but like, is that how they're really making the money? No, they're making money off advertising, and they're just a drop. They're just a drop in the bucket in the even the U.S. advertising market, right? Because we've still got everything else. Amazon's got the same thing, but everybody goes, it's Amazon, they dominate this kind of things to it. And in reality, in the United States, all of e-commerce is only about 15% of the retail market in the United States, what it is, and Amazon's just a fraction of that. So it's really sort of like, well, what are they dominating? Like, there's so many other options on this. You're never going to get them that way. Like, to basically claim that they're monopolistic on there. The way you can get them, and I think this is the way that they need to keep pursuing it, is the idea is that if they're doing things to keep competitors out, like if they're going through and constantly buying things up and constantly buying things up just to shut them down, or if they're doing things to get other people to implode or whatever it is, then that is totally against the rules, and that's something you could catch them on or whatever it is. But nobody seems to be going that way after them. Instead, they're actually just trying to say, not a monopoly. They're dominating, 64% of no searches, which is not only not a real metric, but it's also things where it doesn't help your cause at all. It actually doesn't prove anybody's point that's happening to that kind of stuff or views that kind of thing. So it's
Exactly.
I'm going like, what are you trying to accomplish, man? It's
the
like,
thing of a monopoly. What
Yeah.
makes a monopoly is when you use that position to shut down any chance of competition, when you stop people having the choice. The thing is, honestly, I'd argue that ads are a Google product. That when we're talking about Google products, we're not just talking about things on a google.com domain. Every time you click through an ad or through a paid link on a carousel or through something that's effectively GMB based, technically that's a Google product to me.
oh,
Because
totally it is. Yeah. But
it's putting money in their coffers. It's
But-
putting their agenda first.
Yeah.
But the fact is, if people don't like that, there are at least 2 other search engines they can go to that won't be happening on.
Mm-hmm.
And if Google want to risk making one of those other engines suddenly succeed, remember what replaced Alta Vista wasn't just that Google was better. Alta Vista died in a sea of spam. The results on Alta Vista at the end were terrible. They'd gone as far as you could go with on-page SEO. We'd all worked out enough ways to game it where the results were awful. You had to go through, on an average search, I was clicking through 5-6 pages of results to find something.
Yep.
Now, that's part of what drove people. Is we've just talked about, the fact that people will stick with IE6 and people will stick with old practices years after they're out of date because they're comfortable with it and they don't see any need to change. Well, that if Alta Vista had been still working enough that they didn't feel like it was a complete waste of their time, they'd have stuck with Alta Vista back then. Trust me, I remember these times. And the same with Ask. Ask was very popular. Teoma technically was a better engine than Google in some ways, but it didn't have that brand recognition. There's a lot going on, and I agree with you earlier, where I don't think another search engine is going to replace Google. Partly, too many people want to work at Google if they're in that field. Google's got the budget, it's got the research development, the people you can interact with at Google are phenomenal. I remember talking with Pedro Diaz. He learned Python from the guy that created Python. That happens at Google. The people you can interact with there, the intelligence around you, the things you can learn and do, that's phenomenal. And a lot of people are always going to want to work at Google, which means Google is always going to have a bit of a staff monopoly. And if they've got the staff monopoly and the talent monopoly, then... But again, it's free choices. They could have gone elsewhere and they didn't. You can't penalize Google for happening to be the best, or
and that's
for being perceived as the best.
Yeah, and to your point, that's even, that's even the real point with the idea of Google, where people said, oh, they're doing this thing. They're people are using their, their travel search function, or they're having them use this kind of stuff. And I go, well, yeah, they invented this platform. Like, why is everybody like, it's their thing? They made it. People are coming to use it. What did you expect them to do? Like, it's, and I think it's one of the things where, and it's funny, I could understand this if this was the UK or this was some other country where things were whatever, and there was that capitalism wasn't the way that this stuff was supposed to be working. But in the US, this is totally the way it works. So for people to step up and do this thing, you're like, what did you expect them to do? Like, this is like, they created this thing, they want to do this stuff. They're not a public utility. Right? They if you want to make them one of those things, like, you can bring that argument up all day and said, like, this should be part of it, but good luck on that one, right? Nobody's going to go for that one, because that's not capitalism. That's not the way this country works, right? We've got
to round this off.
Yeah.
For that, I was like, this was an old argument. There used to be this thing about they wanted more regulation, and Google should be declared a public utility. At which point, I pointed out that at that point, manipulating Google becomes messing with a public utility. Do you want to see what some kind of sentences that would cost for spammers? When your government is coming down on you.
Yeah, if you don't like the quality of the results now, just wait a couple of weeks. They'll go totally to hell.
Yeah.
There is an old tradition that we had in rounding out these shows, and I'm going to go back to that in memory, my friend. Terry, what are you up to in the coming week?
Who, me?
Yeah, what plans have you got for this week?
I've been working on a theme and a plugin. I keep plugging away. It's been a year and a half now. Every day I do a little on it.
Keep plugging away. Very nice. Good pun. Doc, what are you up to this coming week?
Working with a couple new clients and paired up with Steve and Rob and trying to continue to get Web Narwhal cranking.
I'm not sure about the name personally. I'm not sure I want to think about horny fish every time I think about it. Jeff, what are you up to this coming week?
It's going to be busy. Some things at Amplitude, my company, are actually changing, and unfortunately, I can't really fully talk about them in the public just yet. But they're in July. It'll be a little bit different, I guess, around there. So I can talk about that later. But but we've also come into the idea of prepping for the summer courses over at UCLA. are coming about. I'll be doing that again. I'll be doing my SEO course in this, so there's things to fix, things to update. Gotta make sure everything's not falling out of way. And since the last time I did the presentations, and it seems like the record store is just a thing every other hour that I have that you usually would be sitting at home trying to catch up on the new Obi-Wan series. That's instead I'm over at the record store cataloging and doing something like that. So, but yeah, never a dull moment around here.
Excellent. Zara, how about you?
I am at work. I am working on shifting content from basic sort of informational stuff to more of a presentation. It's for career coaching, that particular part, to more about the benefits of coaching and how, speaking of change management, you can go about change management in your life. And also, I had submitted a short story to an anthology, just as you were, and they sent me. And after I had submitted it, I went, "Oh my God, it needs this one more sentence, right?" And I put in my copy, I put in the one sentence. And yesterday, they sent me an email. We've extended the deadline, so if you'd like to, make any changes, I'm like, yes. The sentence is in.
Okay, that rounds us off for this week. Thanks to those who joined us. Thanks to all the panel here, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.
Goodbye, all. Thanks for joining us.
Oh.
See ya.